jammed me like back to back.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Foresight TV. I wonder if that actually hit. Welcome to another episode of Foresight TV. I'm seeing the live button where the count starts after I'm halfway talking. I just barely got in from Nick in Dallas, got weathered out. Sevy did better than me. I am with Sevy Petras, who I waved to. I guess I gave a hug to it, Nick, but we didn't really chat. And I don't even know exactly what we're going to talk about, but there's lots of good stuff to talk about. I'd actually like to get some feedback about your thoughts from the most recent Nick and what you're working on and her stories and lots of stuff. But before we get into that conversation, let's start with this.
Hey guys, Steve Moran here.
So before we get started, Sevy, I've got to say that this episode of Foresight TV, the whole Foresight TV, is brought to you by KARE. They are the unstaffing agency. They help you fill those missing spots, the place where you can't find anybody to fill in from your staff at a price that's a ton less money than you pay a traditional agency. And oftentimes people find that even if you have to pay overtime, using KARE is a better way to staff and will keep your costs down. They've got great people. And of course, the last thing I always want to tell you is that if you bring somebody in from KARE and they are like amazing, wonderful, and they fall in love with you and you fall in love with them, and you think, I want to hire them, but I don't want to have to pay $1 million to hire them. KARE doesn't charge $1 million. They don't even charge $1. You can just make a deal with them and they become your employee, and KARE will wish you well. And so they are completely here to keep the staffing costs at a more reasonable level. And so if you are struggling with staffing at all, you ought to be talking to them. And the last thing I would say is if you are a caregiver and you're looking to pick up some extra shifts, or you're not working for Priority Lifecare, so you're working for somebody you don't like very much, because that wouldn't happen with Sevy and her team, but then you might want to talk to them about picking up some extra shifts or doing something. So, and I probably just made a whole bunch of other operators mad, so I shouldn't have said that. But here I am. So Sevy, let's welcome. Let's actually start with a little bit about who you are, what you're passionate about, Priority Lifecare, and then we'll go from there.
Sure, and we like KARE too. We obviously use KARE. I do want to say this before we get started, because this is something that I actually truly believe. I do believe that, you know, agency is there for a reason, and it's not a crutch, right? Like, it shouldn't be there because you're using it to fully staff your entire building. But there are times when we all need a little bit of extra for one reason or another. Like, everybody gets the flu. Like, you want to be able to provide the infantry whenever your teams need it. So I did want to preface that after saying that.
And I've talked about it before, but I know that, like, James Lee, one time for the holiday party, he basically replaced his whole staff for a couple hours with KARE so he could go do something wonderful with his entire team. And I just thought it was an amazing idea. So, and
I love James Lee, by the way. I just saw him.
What's that?
I just saw James like a week or two ago. I love him. But it's true. I mean, I think it's something like, again, it shouldn't be staffing all the time, and it shouldn't be your answer for, you know, filling all of your positions, but it should be something that you use when you need to use it, and you shouldn't be afraid to use it. I mean, it's always been a part of our industry. It's always going to be a part of our industry. It's just, I think, how and when you use it to make sure you're doing it appropriately.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I know we're kind of going off on a tangent, but I do think I talked to some leaders who are really comfortable with not trying to staff at 100%, but knowing that occupancy goes up and down and workloads go up and down, and that it's actually, you can take better care of your permanent staff because you make sure they get to work all the time, and then you deal with that fluctuation. And so everybody does it a little bit differently, but I think that you've got to use all the tools that are at your disposal. So
you do, and those are just one of the tools, right, in your handbag, and it should be. And, you know, we are a very employee first company, And we try very hard to not cookie cutter every single community. And, like you said, some people try to do it a little bit differently. And I think that's been one of our successes, is we can take a completely, a very large building of 150, 200, unit community. We can take a community that's somewhere between 30 and 60 units and make them successful. It's about, I think, approaching each building as its own unique individual and trying to identify how you can be a resource in that area geographically with that specific community, rather than trying to be a one size fits all. And I think we try very hard to play well in the sand with others, whether it's other buildings or other vendors. We really do try to be a resource and work with everybody. I'm sure there's, a few people that may feel differently, but we try really hard to play well with everyone.
Yeah. But you obviously can't ultimately work with everybody. There are too many vendors and
No,
but anyway. So let's talk about Priority Lifecare, and you've also got this big Her Stories thing off your right shoulder, I guess, at least as we're looking at it. Yeah, that side. Yeah, I know everything is backwards, so you have to. Yeah, it's always really hard for me when I'm on video because I end up pointing the wrong way. So let's talk to me about both of those things. Maybe about your journey with Priority Lifecare, and then your initiative with Her Stories.
Sure. I do have to say, Steve, I'm very excited. You and I are very color coordinated. Your blue is matching very well with me. We planned this, everybody. We planned our
I'm colorblind, so it's just pure luck.
I have very vibrant colors on, and of course, a little bit of pink. My signature color. So, so my background was in banking. And my mom was an administrator at a community that had assisted living and memory care, all private pay. And, my journey with Priority Lifecare really started out of that need of, I was banking during the great financial crisis, and the company that I was working for was acquired by another company. And that company was going to shrink entirely, pretty much its senior housing division of lending. Nobody was lending during those times. It's not quite as reminiscent in today's environment, because we do still actually have lending going on. I mean, that was a time when all of banking completely changed and evolved, because it was a different set of circumstances that was causing the economic turmoil versus today's. And I was very fortunate that because of my background in banking, I had the opportunity to know and see what made a really good team to be able to comprise a management company for assisted living. And I saw a huge demand during that time period as well for affordable and middle market, because there was really nobody focused on it. There's some focused on it now. It's still not enough, but that was really where it kind of came from. I sat down at the Thanksgiving dinner table with my family, and like any good salesperson, brought what their drink of choice was, wine. And, convince them to basically quit their jobs and come and join me, for, no pay, to start this new senior living concept and company to focus on middle market, and particularly in states where I thought and felt that the waiver program for assisted living was going to start to get more embraced. And that's, really kind of how we got started. So we've been operating since 2010. So this is our 14th year of operation as a team and a company. And during that time, we evolved, much like any other company. And we started off as kind of owner operators with a different capital partner, and then very quickly realized that as things had changed from my banking days, where operators had to own, there was a big emergence of institutional capital who really didn't want to take the liability or risks on the operation side, and really just wanted to own the real estate. And this is really where I feel I saw the emergence of the REITs, who were coming out of only doing these triple net leases. And, that's when we started seeing the RIDEAs coming out, and then their ability to kind of just like hire third party, and then other bigger private equity groups who were looking for ease for change of operators if they wanted. So not requiring that they had real skin in the game or, JVs, they were able to third party. That really helped us start our platform and break away from our capital partner at the time. And that's when we started putting a lot of resources into our back office and established ourselves as this affordable turnaround kind of middle market player. And because my financial background, I had such a strong insistence that our financial reporting was strong, consistent, and timely. I think it made us a great candidate for these institutional investors as they started to come up, and for us to be able to be a resource to them in those spaces.
So this is a really interesting conversation to me. As I'm sure you recall, in the fall, Nick, there was a REIT panel,
Mm-hmm.
and I was there. I actually liked it quite a bit. I felt like I learned stuff. I felt like there was more transparency. And then the next evening, I ran into a couple of operators who I have tremendous respect for. They're really, really way up in my list. And they said, well, what did you think of that panel? I said, oh, I really liked it. And they said, oh, man, it was terrible. So I wish you'd been up there asking the hard questions. And so I've been spending a lot of time sort of thinking about the capital stack. And I find operators who have, there are a number of operators who've just said they won't do REITs at all anymore. They've gone out and found private equity, oftentimes family offices, and they just can't stand the REITs. But at the same time, I've talked to other operators who said, you know what? The REITs have some very precise requirements, but as long as you understand what you're doing and you have good open conversation, we have a great relationship with the REITs, and we bet on them, and we're continuing to bet on them, and we have really great success. I just love to have your thoughts on that.
I think that's one of the beautiful things about our industry is different strokes for different folks. And, there's not a one size fits all. And to me, it's just like the choices that our employees have for deciding what company they want to work for, just like our residents have a choice in what, communities they want to live in. It's the same thing of what works. I think it all really depends on what your goals are as a company, and, how you're looking, so for instance, if you're just a strict third-party operator, long, sticky contracts are really what you're looking for, because
Yep.
that allows you the opportunity to build your teams around these and to provide them longevity, right? Like my job is to provide opportunities for the people who work with us, whether it's at the building or it's at my management company. And if I can't continue to grow and expand and give them more opportunities for them to grow and expand, I'm going to have a hard time holding on to people. So if you're managing for private equity, you have to really understand their time frame for hold on those funds that they're investing in, because many of them are a 3 to 5 year horizon. And if they're going beyond that, they're in a different type of a fund. So I think it's important to understand that, because then that means they need to sell or recapitalize their community in order to meet the requirements of their fund that they've invested their monies on, right? So if you as a company are co-investing and you're getting these waterfalls, and this is how you're going, and then your hope is that who they sell it to is going to retain you, hey, that's a very good strategy, because it's most likely that once that value has been created, you're coming in and staying for the second time. The next person who's holding it's probably holding it significantly longer. So I think it just really and that's how we approach these contracts, is we try to understand, what's your end objective? Are we coming in here to help you create value and then get out of it in the next 3 years because this is what your underlying debt is? Or do you have HUD debt on this and you want to hold this thing forever and it's our job to kind of maintain? So I just think it depends on what your goal is, and it depends on understanding and communicating those things up front.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think that we tend to think of business as sort of dollars and cents, but personality really plays a big role in that. I know that as we work with vendor partners, and to some degree, even as we interact with operators, there's some people we really like that we just have a great relationship with, and others not so much. And one of the things that we've learned in terms of our sponsors is that occasionally we'll come across somebody who wants to be just very transactional. We're going to give you money and we expect this out of you, and we don't want you to give us advice. We just don't work very well that way. We want to be friends with the people we're working with. We want to make sure we're aligned on passion. So absolutely right. So tell me, man, I'm going to actually I want to get to her stories, but I'd love to just sort of have your impressions from the Nick that we were just at.
Sure. And yes, I'm so sorry. Like, we saw each other briefly. We're like, hey, hi, I'm going to talk to you on Friday. So I think so I'm on the Nick board. I'm a part of the fall planning committee, but not the spring planning committee. And, historically, I think the spring conference is generally less attended than the fall. But we've been seeing more and more and more and more people coming to the spring as they're coming to the fall as well. I thought that generally the the mood was optimistic. There were a lot more capital than I thought was going to be there in terms of lenders. I was expecting less just based on some of the original numbers that we were getting from people coming. So I was kind of optimistic to see. I was like, oh, I didn't expect to see you here, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I thought there was a lot, and I'm hearing a lot of people were lending. Like a lot of the conversations, like there is lending going on. However, it is kind of in a very, very small, tiny little box of which they're doing it. And that's primarily just due to the fact that there's a lot of deals that just aren't penciling. And that, we started to see that at the end of last year. But I would say like the one optimistic thread that I think is really important that we as an industry are really getting our arms around talking about is the introduction of value-based care and how that's going to impact our industry. And as well as I do, Steve, like we've generally been very slow adopters to anything that has to do with any type of like federal regulatory oversight. And we know it's coming with some of the situations that have been occurring on the Hill as a result of some of the press of which we will not mention. Those names will not be mentioned. But it's coming, and there's just we just understand and know that. In my opinion, I think it's kind of like Napster, right? Like Napster was the first, electronic online way to digitally share and listen to music. And while that's not around anymore, you kind of needed to kind of get on the bus to understand how it was going to work and adapt to it so that when, the iPod came out, like you were able to be like, yes, I know what this is. And the same thing with like Facebook, like it wasn't the original one, right? But and now it's not even the one that most of us even use the most. But we kind of have to start to learn it and get to know it and get used to it. And I'm really excited and encouraged that Nick has so embraced that and really trying to educate, our industry with those types of panels that they had on there.
So there was a panel on Wednesday evening. I'm going to spill a little beans because I'm working on an article. I spent quite a bit of time on it. That where Ann Tomlinson said, and it was kind of just in passing, but I wrote it down. I put a circle around it. I put a star around it, another circle around it. And she said this. She said, it kind of feels like senior living is disrupting healthcare, and they don't even know it. Mm. And it just so resonated with me because I think, we've got this emotional debate that still exists. Is senior living healthcare or is it something else? Mm-hmm. And it's not exactly one fits all. I mean, you wouldn't really say that Active 55 is healthcare at all. But even when you look at independent living, as I talk to people who are consuming senior living, they're picking independent living because of safety and security and thinking about what's going to happen as their bodies and their minds continue to age and want to be able to be better prepared for that. And so I think that, to me, my conclusion is the answer is we're more healthcare than not. So I don't know, thoughts?
I agree with you. And I'm going to tell you why. I think that the reason that we as an asset class, if you're talking about from real estate, has fared well during every economic downturn, upturn, you name it, including the pandemic. Like we took our hits. It wasn't because people didn't want to use our services. The states physically restricted our ability to meet the need and the demand of the individuals. We still had move-ins. It was just that we had more outs than we had move-ins as a result of it was just so difficult to move people in. And we would have had more if they hadn't restricted us like that. But I agree with you. I think that even independent living, and that is an area that we are betting big on as a service provider. And I think you really nailed it, Steve, when you said that the individuals you're talking to who are consuming senior housing, they're leaning more towards independent living. And I think it's for two main reasons. One, it's still their home, but they're going to get all of the amenities that we sell in assisted living, but they get to control their destiny a little bit more, and they get to a la carte the services that they need. And those services are covered by their benefits for the most part. Now, if we all live in the next cycle to be close to 120, which is what they're predicting, right? We just got to make it to, what is it, like 2030? Anybody that lives past the year 2030 is probably going to live 120 years. We all know that the last basically like 2 to 3 years are really like your most difficult, because at that point, most things have broken down, whether it's from a physical perspective or a mental perspective. And at that point, if we all live that long, we all are going to need some additional services that are not able to be maintained in our home, whatever that home looks like, right? They're going to be medically based. And independent living just allows us to a la carte those at a residential area that we want, but it provides safety, security, meals. It provides socialization and all of the things that we're not able to get in our single family homes. But it's never going to be healthcare focused by the individual who owns those buildings. It's going to be coordinated by the individuals who are running those buildings. And that is, I think, what's going to be the difference going forward. Basically what we have are like little country clubs. We have like little country clubs that like, here's your meals and your entertainment and your living arrangements and your this. And that is, I think, where it's going to come. And then how we're going to coordinate better with our medical teams so that it is maximizing individuals' benefits is really where that's going to come into play, I think, in the future. And we're just 5-6 years away from really being able to tap into that, in my opinion.
So the other place I'm seeing tremendous opportunity, and I hear just whispers about this already happening, is hospital systems being totally impacted in terms of not having enough beds in their acute hospital, and then having to push people out to nursing homes that nobody really wants to go into and are very expensive. And depending on the state, in my state, there's so much you can do in California in an assisted living that unless mostly very few people who couldn't live in assisted living if they had the finances to be able to do that all the way through end of life. But what I'm beginning to hear is more and more payer systems are looking at that and saying, we need to be working with the assisted living, the senior living people, because they can take our residents that would otherwise be either stuck at home, not being cared for adequately. And so, yeah, it might cost us more money and not seem very economic, but if I can prevent a hospital stay that's going to cost me $30,000 or $40,000 once a year, all of a sudden the economics on that start to look really, really good. So I don't know if you're seeing that much in your communities or not.
So like you were asked at the beginning, like, what are some things I'm really excited about, passionate about? Like one obviously is about how to tap into their benefits. The second one is just that. It's really about the technology and the ways that we're going to be able to be more proactive as senior living providers versus reactive, and all of that difficulty, especially in somebody like an operator like us, where we're in 15 different states. Every single state is different. It's not like nursing homes where exactly no matter what state you're in, everything's a little bit nuancy every state, but for the most part, like CMS is who's guiding them, and those are pretty similar standards. And assisted living is so different. Like you're saying, like, here's what you can get in California, and you live in California, so it very, very well, right? But like if you live in California, you're like, well, these are what my family, and my friends are used to seeing. But then somebody calls you about it and you're like, hey, senior housing. You're like, they live in Georgia. And they're like, oh, no, you can get this and this. And they're like, I just went and asked and they said, I can't get that at all.
Yeah.
And
that's right.
you know what I mean? And I think that's one of the challenges, I think, specifically with our industry. It's a blessing and a curse, is that no one state is created equally, so those are great, right? That's a lot of what our country is comprised of, is like every state's rules and regs are very, very different and unique. Some are better, some are worse. Like not every state has a Medicaid waiver program that will, can be applied to their assisted living. And if you exhaust all your resources and you need to have, 24-hour full-time care, a nursing home is your only option in many, many states, right? And assisted living won't be. But I think when it comes to, looking at that from an oversight perspective and the technology that's coming down, that's when I get really excited, because as an employee first company, I'm always trying to come up with ways that I can make their jobs at the building level easier, because the people who work there, like, they want to be there. Not just they need to make a living, and they want to make a living, and everybody wants to, to earn a good wage and make a good living and have a career. but they want to be there. Like they're called to be there. And so I'm always looking for ways to make their jobs easier. And the ways that I can do that is with passive technology that allows them the freedom to spend the maximum amount of time with the resident, talking with them, helping them, interacting with them, not plugging stuff into a computer, which has to verify to the state that we've done all the things that we said we're going to do. We have to do those things. But the technology that's starting to come down is helping us do two things: passively be able to provide that care and services in a way that's making the jobs of the individual caregivers significantly easier. And then two, being able to capture all that information that we know people are doing without them having to stop what they're doing. Because honestly, like 89 to 95% of the time, we have done the things that we just did not document that we did. Like I'm not saying that there are times when shit didn't get done. Pardon my French. It didn't get done and we didn't document because it didn't get done. It does occasionally happen. We are humans, but I do not believe that I believe that it is a very, very small fragment of the time that there's an individual working at the community who's doing something to intentionally harm somebody. I don't believe that they're doing. I think most people are either doing something because they either like it didn't occur to them, they did it, they forgot it, they got like busy doing something else, and they just got busy. That I'm not making excuses for it by any means. Like it's all of those instances are awful and they're unfortunate. But I think people are primarily there because they want to be there. And it's our job as an industry to help find ways to keep them engaged and make their jobs easier.
Yeah, so I love this. You've thrown so much on the table here that we won't have time for it all. But I want to say a couple of things. When I came through the conference season in the fall, one of the things that just was driving me crazy was that at virtually every conference I went to, I heard significant leaders stand up and say nobody wants to work in senior living. And I just don't believe and how do you hire people into your organization if you think nobody really wants to work there? And the truth, and at the same time, I had all these conversations, and I had a couple of them at Nick this week with these young 20-something, early 30-something, many cases third and fourth generation kids coming out where their families are running, where there's plenty of money. They could have gone out and done anything they wanted to do. And they've said, no, senior living is where I want to put my life because I can make a good living and I can make the world a better place. People do want to work in senior living. And I believe that and there are companies out there that basically don't have a staffing crisis. Mm-hmm. Because they believe they're doing what you're doing, right? They're saying we're an employee first company. We want to make it so people love coming to work here. I don't know whether you had Sliff in Napa, but there was a guy there who gave a short talk out of New York. He's got 10% turnover on his CNAs unionized. So it's not pay. It's just they've created an environment, and that's what's possible. And then, of course, technology is so messy right now, and it's so exciting because there's so much new stuff coming out. And, there's going to be a lot of stuff that dies, but that's what makes it better. So
I think that it is getting better. I mean, they're listening to us. They're inviting us to the table, like to just have these discussions. And again, it's starting to get more and more passive. And that's where technology is going to be really sticky, and it's going to get a lot less expensive, right? Is that we're going to put it in there and nobody's going to have to do anything to use it and get the benefits of it. But, back to the employee piece of it is, I do believe that I think personally that we are the best industry from a career perspective. And I think that it is for one reason and one reason only. Name me one other career where you could do anything from caregiving to business analytics to insurance to technology to security to media to reporting. I mean, there is not one thing that happens and occurs in senior housing that there isn't an area that if you had some experience in that would not be applicable. But at the heart of what we all do, whether it is in your chair, Steve, or at a chair in a community, what every single one of us is doing is to support the lives of the residents that live in those buildings and the people that work in them. There is not one other industry that you have such a purpose behind what you're doing. And so I just think that we as an industry have done a terrible job of promoting that. And it's one of the reasons that I started my podcast of Senior Housing Her Stories. Over 90% of the people that work in our buildings are women. 85% of them that live in them are women. The majority of the adult child who's making the decision are women. And yet it is very upside down triangle when we're talking about the people that, are at the base of this industry, and then those are at the top of it. And so part of my podcast is to help encourage women to hear all these amazing stories of how women have found their careers in senior housing and perhaps be inspired to join our industry as a result of it.
Yeah. So tell me, so we're almost out of time. We're sort of out of time, but that's okay. We can always run a little bit late. Tell me about her stories.
Sure. So it is a podcast dedicated to telling the origin stories of women who found careers in senior housing. And it runs the gambit. It's not just at the building level. It's all the way into the supportive services, all the way into academia, that talk about and teach about and learn about senior housing. And they're 30-minute segments, just telling people stories about and the challenges of being a woman and the opportunities of being a woman in senior housing.
Cool. And it's every new episode every week?
Every Friday.
Every Friday. Good. So as if you were, man, I got to talk to you for another hour, and I know we can't do that, but we
could, but nobody would listen. Nobody would stay on that long.
I think we're brilliant, so they might.
I think we are too, Steve.
So anyway, so what else should I be asking you or talking about before? I mean, what else are you really passionate about? Anything I'm missing?
I think I'll tell you the one other thing that I am very passionate about in our industry is collaboration. I think that we win as an industry when we support one another and we have each other's backs. And when we each know what we do really well, like if I'm in affordable and so-and-so is like really good at just the higher end, very exclusive.
Yeah.
When somebody comes and we don't try to make them fit into the square peg and it's a round hole, when we try to help each other and we are just being a resource to people, we all win. And I think the more and more we as operators can collaborate versus looking at each other as competition, and we start to get some pricing transparency so that we can give the people who are interested a better feel from the onset when they're in this very difficult time in their lives where they're trying to identify and make very, very difficult decisions for their loved ones. We're all going to come out of this with higher satisfaction rates from our family members and their residents. And we're also going to have better satisfaction and attract more people from our employees as well.
Yeah, I do think that I sort of go two ways on this cooperation. I think there are lots of places where we need to cooperate, but I also worry, and I've heard you say this, and so this is a whole another conversation we should have sometime, because I also think that my job as a CEO, your job as a leader, as a CEO, is to take care of your residents and your team members and do a great job there. And you can't be responsible for that other company down the street. And so It's got to be both of those at the same time.
Yep.
And figuring out how to balance that is really, really tough. But the one thing you said that I so believe in is that we need more transparency.
Oh yeah.
It is so, I've been a senior living consumer, and some might call me an expert, and it was a terrible, terrible process.
I believe it.
And I have got a couple of other friends who are in the industry or adjacent to the industry who've been consumers, and they just tell me these terrible, terrible stories. Too much friction, too hard to find out pricing and people responding. And so it's such a great opportunity. And I see it as an opportunity, not as a problem. I think it's just, we look at these things and we say, man, that's a great place to really start making a difference. So
it's true. It's true. And I think those are the things that we're going to start focusing on as an industry. And we're just always getting better. But again, sharing best practices is, if one person has a good experience somewhere, that is a good experience for our whole industry. It shouldn't just be related to one person's company.
Yeah, and I think that that's the one thing that's really still missing in the industry. And you're doing it with her stories, but we need to be doing it on the consumer level in addition. And that's, we've got to be telling stories about how we're changing the lives of, we had this person who was living alone at home, and they didn't want to move in. Their daughter forced them to move in, and they fell in love again. And they had this amazing rest of their life. And there's stories like that happen every day, and we're just not very good about telling them.
we're not, and we need to be better. But you know what, Steve, that stuff doesn't always sell papers.
Yep.
Feel good stuff.
Yeah, it is.
We
Sevy,
need an Oscar-winning movie to come out, so it'll help us.
We do. And right now, most of the stuff that comes out about senior living tends to be comedic and sort of, I'm not exactly slapstick, but sort of slapstick. And I don't know that, I have you seen the retirement house TikTok?
No.
Or
I don't know on TikTok. I got to get on TikTok.
They're also on Instagram.
Okay, all right. I was looking on Instagram then.
So they're on, and I know
that's
you're on
my
Instagram,
age demographic.
But you should go on Instagram. Go look up retirement house.
Retirement house. Okay.
It's a manufactured thing, so they're actors and actresses. But when I first I thought, oh, this is senior living, and I watched these people, and I said, those are the people I want to go live with when I go to senior living. That's the kind of storytelling we need in senior living. So, and we have plans to see if we can recreate the little bit of that with Jada, who's behind the scenes here.
Jada's awesome. Thanks,
when we're in Argentum in a month or so, we're going to see if we can go create some stuff like that.
If anybody can do it, Steve, you can.
So anyway, thank you very much. This has been amazing. Hang on for just a second. I want to say thanks again to Jada for running things in the background. And again, thanks to KARE for supporting this effort.
Thanks, Charles.